This is HOA mess, and the timeline is absurd. I am standing in my own backyard in Billings, Montana, watching a woman I have never met point at my fence and scream that I am about to lose my house. Her name is Pamela Brown. She is the vice chair of the Cedar Point Estates Association Design Review Board, and she is holding a clipboard like it is a weapon. She is maybe 5 feet 4 inches tall, wearing a purple jacket and a gray sun hat, and she has a crossbody bag so stuffed with paper packets that it looks like it might explode. She is standing 3 feet from my back gate, her face red, her voice loud enough that I can see curtains moving in the house next door. She says, "You do not build to my standard, you pay to my standard." That is the first time I hear that line. It will not be the last. I am a paramedic. I work 24-hour shifts at the station, and when I am off, I do not have the energy for nonsense. I moved to Billings 6 months ago for the job and because the cost of living looked manageable. Cedar Point Estates is a newer subdivision on the west side of town, near the airport, where every house looks like it came from the same 3 floor plans and every lawn has the same height grass because the HOA checks. The association has 32 pages of rules, and Pamela seems to have memorized all of them. She showed up today because I finished installing a 6-foot privacy fence along my back property line, and she says it is illegal. I have a permit from the city. I have an approval letter from the HOA stamped 2 months ago. I have receipts for every board, every post, every bag of concrete. None of that matters to her. She keeps jabbing her finger toward the fence and saying the word setback like it is a curse. I tell her the fence is 2 feet inside my property line, exactly where the approval letter said it had to be. She says the approval letter was wrong, that the board never should have issued it, and that I am in violation of Article 12, Section 4, subsection C. I ask her which section that is. She does not answer. Instead, she pulls a folded packet of papers out of her bag and waves it at me. She says this is a printed plat map, and it shows the setback is different from what I think. I ask to see it. She pulls it back and says she is not required to share documentation with residents during an active review. That is when I realize this is not about the fence. This is about control. I try to keep my voice level. I say, "Pamela, I followed the process. I submitted drawings. I got approval. I hired a licensed contractor. The city inspector signed off yesterday." She cuts me off and says the city does not govern HOA rules, and the city inspector does not have authority over design standards. Then she says, "We can tow first and explain later. That is how enforcement works." I blink. I ask her what she means by tow. She says, if I do not agree to stop work immediately and submit to a secondary review, the association will consider my property in violation and will authorize a contractor tow for any vehicles parked in violation of emergency access easements. I look around. My truck is parked in my own driveway. There is no emergency access easement anywhere near my property. I realize she is making up threats to see if I will fold. I do not fold. I tell her I am not stopping anything, and if she wants to challenge the fence, she can submit a formal complaint through the management company and we can have a hearing. She smiles. It is not a friendly smile. She says the hearing is already scheduled for next Tuesday at 10 in the morning. I work a 24-hour shift that starts Monday night. There is no way I can attend. I ask if we can move it. She says board policy is that residents are notified 72 hours in advance, and failure to attend results in a default decision. I realize she scheduled it at a time she knew I could not make. That is the HOA method. They stack the deck so you lose before you even start. I have a problem. I am in the middle of closing on this house. The sale is not final yet. I am still in escrow. My closing date is 8 days away. If the HOA puts a lien on the property or declares it in violation, the title company could delay or kill the deal. I have already put down earnest money. I have already moved half my stuff in. If this falls apart, I lose everything. That is what is at stake. Pamela knows it. I can see it in the way she is standing there with her arms crossed, waiting for me to panic. I swallow my anger because I know the moment to use it is coming. I do not let her see that she rattled me. I say, fine, I will be at the hearing. She says, good, and then she turns and walks back toward the street, her crossbody bag bouncing against her hip. I watch her get into a silver sedan with a Cedar Point Estates board member sticker on the bumper. She drives away. I stand there in my yard, looking at my fence, which is perfect. Every post is level, every panel is aligned, every screw is countersunk. It is exactly what the approval letter asked for, and she knows it. I pull out my phone and call my friend Devin. He is a paralegal who works for a firm in town that does a lot of real estate and HOA disputes. I have known him since I moved here. He helped me review the HOA documents before I bought the place. He answers on the second ring. I tell him what just happened. He listens, and then he says, "She threatened to tow your truck?" I say, "Yeah. She said they can tow first and explain later." He laughs, but it is not a happy laugh. He says, "That is not a real thing. She is trying to intimidate you." He tells me to document everything. Take pictures of the fence, the approval letter, the permit, the inspection certificate. He says if they try to fine me, I need to file a written objection within 14 days, or the fine becomes a lien. He also says I should start keeping a log of every interaction with Pamela, because if this goes to a hearing or a lawsuit, a pattern of harassment is gold. I thank him and hang up. Then I walk the fence line and take about 50 pictures. I photograph every post, every panel, the measuring tape stretched along the string line we used during installation, the survey stakes the contractor left in the ground, and the property corners marked with orange flags. I photograph the approval letter, the permit, and the inspection sticker the city put on my front door. I email all of it to Devin, and I save a backup on my laptop. Then I go inside and pull up the Cedar Point Estates homeowner portal. I want to see if there is any record of this secondary review Pamela mentioned. The portal is a mess. Half the links are broken. The meeting minutes are 6 months out of date. The Rules and Regulations section has 3 different versions of the same document with conflicting page numbers. I find the hearing schedule under a tab labeled Compliance Actions. There it is. My address. Scheduled for Tuesday, 10 in the morning. The reason listed is unapproved structure, setback violation, aesthetic non-compliance. I feel my jaw tighten. The structure is approved. The setback is correct. The aesthetic is exactly what the design guidelines specify. This is a setup. I click through the rest of the portal and find something interesting. There is a public records section where homeowners can request copies of correspondence and decisions. I submit a request for all design review approvals and violations issued in Cedar Point Estates over the last 2 years. The system says it will take up to 10 business days. That is too slow. I need leverage before Tuesday. I call Devin again. I ask him if there is a faster way to get HOA records. He says I can request them in person at the management company office and cite Montana state law, which requires HOAs to provide records within a reasonable time. He gives me the statute number. I write it down. The next morning, I drive to the management company office. It is in a strip mall on the south side of Billings, next to a nail salon and a payday loan place. The office is small, with 2 desks, a waiting area that smells like burnt coffee, and a receptionist who looks like she would rather be anywhere else. I tell her I am a Cedar Point Estates homeowner, and I am requesting copies of all design review approvals and violations for the last 2 years. She asks why. I tell her I am preparing for a hearing, and I am entitled to the records under Montana statute. I give her the number. She sighs, types something into her computer, and says it will cost me 50 cents per page. I say fine. She disappears into a back room. 20 minutes later, she comes back with a banker's box. She says, "This is everything. It is going to be about 400 pages. I do the math. $200. I hand her my credit card. She runs it, prints a receipt, and hands me the box. I carry it out to my truck and drive home. I spend the rest of the day going through every page. What I find is stunning. There are at least 8 properties in Cedar Point Estates with fences that are closer to the property line than mine, built with materials that do not match the design guidelines, and some that never got approval at all. None of them have been fined. None of them have been cited for violations. None of them have had hearings. I find one property on Maple Court with a chain-link fence that is 18 inches from the property line, built entirely without approval, and the only correspondence in the file is a note from Pamela saying the board elected to defer enforcement pending voluntary compliance. That fence has been there for 3 years. I take pictures of every relevant page. I organize them into a comparison chart. I print out a packet with my fence on one side and all the other fences on the other. I label it Selective Enforcement Evidence. I email a copy to Devin. He calls me an hour later and says, "This is perfect. If they try to fine you, you have a clear argument that the rules are not being applied evenly, and that opens them up to a discrimination claim." He also says I should bring this to the hearing and put it on the record. He says it will force the board to either back down or explain why they are targeting me. I feel a little better, but I still have a problem. The hearing is Tuesday morning, and I work Monday night. I call my supervisor at the station and ask if I can swap shifts with someone. He says he will try, but he cannot promise anything. I tell him it is urgent. He says he will get back to me. I hang up and start preparing for the hearing. I print extra copies of the approval letter, the permit, the inspection certificate, and the comparison chart. I write a statement explaining the timeline and the facts. I rehearse it out loud in my living room until I can deliver it in under 3 minutes without stumbling. Monday afternoon, my supervisor calls. He found someone to cover my shift. I am off the hook. I thank him about 6 times. He laughs and says, "You must really hate your HOA." I say, "You have no idea." Tuesday morning, I wake up early, shower, put on a clean shirt, and drive to the Cedar Point Estates clubhouse where the hearing is being held. The clubhouse is a bland 1-story building near the front entrance of the subdivision with a kitchen, a meeting room, and a storage closet full of folding chairs. There are about 8 cars in the parking lot. I recognize Pamela's silver sedan. I walk inside. The meeting room has a long table at the front where the board members are sitting. Pamela is in the center. To her left is a man in his 60s with a polo shirt and reading glasses. To her right is a woman in her 50s with a blazer and a name tag that says secretary. There are about a dozen residents sitting in chairs facing the table. I recognize a few faces from the neighborhood. Nobody looks happy to be here. I take a seat in the second row and set my folder on my lap. Pamela calls the meeting to order. She reads through some procedural language about how the hearing is being conducted in accordance with Article 16 of the governing documents. Then she says, first item. Property at 1247 Ridgeview Drive. Unapproved structure. Setback violation. Aesthetic non-compliance. She looks at me and says, "Are you the homeowner?" I stand and say yes. She says, "You have 5 minutes to present your case." I walk up to the table and hand each board member a copy of my packet. Pamela barely glances at it. I start by explaining the timeline. I say I submitted a design application in March, received written approval in April, obtained a city permit in May, hired a licensed contractor, built the fence according to the approved plans, and passed the city inspection. I say the fence is 6 feet tall, constructed of pressure-treated wood, stained a neutral brown, and set 2 feet inside my property line, which exceeds the minimum setback requirement in the design guidelines. I show them the approval letter. I show them the permit. I show them the inspection certificate. I say there is no violation. Pamela interrupts. She says, "The setback you are referring to is based on an outdated plat map. The current boundary line is different." I ask her to provide documentation. She says the board does not have to provide documentation during a hearing. The man with the reading glasses shifts in his chair. He says, "Pamela, if we are claiming a boundary issue, we need to have a survey on file." Pamela waves her hand and says, "We have it. It is in the records. I will provide it later." I say, "I would like to see it now." She says, "This is not a court of law. You do not get to make demands." I take a breath. I pull out the comparison chart and hand it to the board. I say, "I have documentation of 8 other properties in Cedar Point Estates with fences that are closer to the property line than mine, built without approval or with materials that do not comply with the design guidelines. None of those properties have been cited. None of them have been fined. This is selective enforcement, and it violates the governing documents, which require rules to be applied uniformly." Pamela's face goes red. She says those properties are not part of this hearing. I say, "They are relevant to whether the rule is being applied fairly." The secretary leans forward and says, "Can I see that?" I hand her the chart. She flips through it. Her expression changes. She looks at Pamela and says, "Some of these properties are on your approval list. Did you sign off on them?" Pamela says, "That was years ago. The rules have changed." I say, "The rules have not changed. The design guidelines are the same version from 2019. The room is quiet. The man with the reading glasses clears his throat and says, "I think we need to table this and review the documentation." Pamela snaps, "We do not need to table anything. The violation is clear." I say, "What violation?" "You have not identified a single thing that is out of compliance." Pamela stands up. She points at me and says, "You do not get to argue with the board. You submitted a structure without verifying the boundary line. You built on an easement. You created a liability for the association." I say, "There is no easement on my property. Show me the plat map. She says, I do not have to show you anything. You do not build to my standard. You pay to my standard. There it is. The second time, I can see a few residents in the audience glance at each other. Pamela is getting louder. She says, if you do not agree to remove the fence voluntarily, the board will authorize a forced removal and you will be billed for the cost. I say, you do not have the authority to do that without proving a violation. She says, we have all the authority we need. The governing documents give the board discretion to enforce aesthetic and safety standards. I say, discretion does not mean arbitrary. The secretary interrupts and says, Pamela, I think we should get a third-party survey before we proceed. Pamela snaps, we do not need a survey. I have the plat map. The man with the reading glasses says, then let us see it. Pamela glares at him. She pulls the folded packet out of her crossbody bag and slaps it on the table. She unfolds it. It is a plat map, but it is not an official survey. It is a printout from an online property database, and the scale is wrong. The man with the reading glasses picks it up, looks at it, and says, this is not a certified document. Pamela says, it is accurate enough. He says, no, it is not. If we are going to claim a boundary issue, we need a licensed surveyor. Pamela says, that is a waste of money. He says, it is the only way to be sure. The secretary nods and says, I agree. Pamela looks at both of them like they just betrayed her. The man with the reading glasses says, I move that we continue this hearing pending a third-party boundary survey. The secretary says, I second. Pamela says, you cannot do that. He says, yes, we can. We just did. He looks at me and says, the association will hire a surveyor. We will notify you of the results. If the fence is in compliance, this matter is closed. If it is not, we will reconvene. I nod and say, thank you. Pamela does not say anything. She just stares at the table, her jaw clenched. I walk out of the clubhouse feeling like I just survived round one. I sit in my truck and text Devin. I tell him what happened. He texts back, good work. Keep everything documented. If they try anything before the survey, call me immediately. I drive home and try to relax, but I cannot shake the feeling that Pamela is not done. That night I get an email from the Cedar Point Estates Management Company. The subject line says Gate Access Update. I open it. The email says that due to a system upgrade, all resident gate codes have been reset, and new codes will be issued within 48 hours. I think that is weird, but I do not think much of it. The next morning, I leave for work. I try to use my gate code at the front entrance. It does not work. I try it 3 times. Nothing. I call the management company. The receptionist says the system is being updated, and I should have a new code by the end of the day. I say fine and drive around to the back entrance, which does not have a gate. I make it to my shift. The next day, I still do not have a new code. I call again. The receptionist says the codes are being issued in batches, and mine has not been processed yet. I ask when it will be processed. She says she does not know. I ask to speak to a manager. She puts me on hold for 10 minutes and then disconnects the call. I realize what is happening. The gate access glitch started the exact moment I pushed back at the hearing. This is retaliation. I call Devin. He says, document it. Every time you try the code and it does not work, write down the date and time. Every time you call the management company, note who you spoke to and what they said. If this is deliberate, It is harassment, and it is a violation of your rights as a homeowner. He also says I should check if anyone else is having the same problem. I text a few neighbors I have met. 2 of them respond. One says his code works fine. The other says she just got her new code yesterday. I am the only one locked out. That night, I come home from my shift and find a notice taped to my front door. It is printed on Cedar Point Estates letterhead. It says, "Violation notice. Unauthorized vehicle parking in fire lane." I read it twice. I have never parked in a fire lane. My truck is always in my driveway. I look at the date on the notice. It says it was issued yesterday at 3:15 p.m. I was at work. My truck was in my driveway. I take a picture of the notice. I take a picture of my truck in the driveway. I call Devin. He says they are trying to stack violations so they can justify a lien or a fine. Do not ignore it. File a written objection within 14 days. I say I will. He says, and start recording every interaction. If Pamela shows up again, turn on your phone and let it run. The next day, I get a call from a number I do not recognize. I answer. A man says, "This is Summit Towing. We have an authorization to remove a vehicle from 1247 Ridgeview Drive for violation of HOA parking rules." I say, "What vehicle?" He says, "A blue truck." I say, "That is my truck. It is parked in my driveway." He says, "The authorization says it is in a fire lane." I say, "It is not. Who authorized this?" He says, "Cedar Point Estates Association." I say, "Do not tow my truck. It is not in violation." He pauses and says, "I need to see the authorization paperwork. If it is wrong, I am not touching it." I say, "Come to the property. I will show you." He says, "I will be there in 20 minutes. I hang up and call Devin. I tell him what just happened. He says, "This is the second tow attempt after you put them on notice to stop. If they actually tow your truck, that is conversion and you can file a police report." He says to take pictures of everything and get the tow driver to confirm the authorization came from the HOA. I say okay. I go outside and wait. 20 minutes later, a flatbed tow truck pulls up. The driver gets out. He is a big guy with a beard and a Summit Towing shirt. He looks at my truck and then looks at me. He says, "You the homeowner?" I say, "Yes." He says, "Show me where the fire lane is." I walk him around the property. I show him the driveway, the street, the curb. I say, "There is no fire lane here. The nearest fire lane is at the clubhouse, half a mile away." He pulls out his phone and looks at a photo. He says, "The work order says the vehicle is blocking emergency access." I say, "It is not." He looks at the photo again. He says, "This does not match." He shows me the photo. It is a picture of a truck parked on the street near the clubhouse. It is not my truck. It is not even the same color. I say, "That is not my truck." He says, "Then someone gave me the wrong address." He puts his phone away and says, "I am not towing anything. If the HOA wants to argue about it, they can call my boss." He gets back in his truck and drives away. I take pictures of everything. I call Devin and tell him what happened. He says, "That is huge. The tow company just confirmed they were given false information. That is fraud. You need to file a formal complaint with the management company and the board. If they do not respond, you can take it to the state." I ask him how to do that. He says Montana has a process for HOA disputes through the Department of Labor. You file a complaint, and if the HOA does not resolve it, the state can investigate. He says it takes time, but it is a nuclear option if I need it. I say I hope it does not come to that. He says, it might. That afternoon, I write a formal complaint letter. I list every incident: the hearing, the gate code lockout, the false violation notice, the fraudulent tow attempt. I cite the governing documents, the Montana statutes Devin gave me, and the evidence I have collected. I send it to the management company via certified mail. I send a copy to the board president, the secretary, and Pamela. I keep a copy for myself. I feel like I am building a wall of paper between me and whatever Pamela is planning next. 2 days later, I get a call from the management company. It is not the receptionist. It is a man who introduces himself as the property manager. His name is Richard. He sounds tired. He says, I received your complaint. I want to discuss it. I say, okay. He says, the gate code issue was a system error. Your code is active now. The parking violation was issued in error. We are voiding it. The tow authorization was based on incorrect information. We have notified Summit Towing that it was a mistake. I say, who provided the incorrect information? He pauses. He says, I cannot disclose that. I say, was it Pamela Brown? He pauses again and says, I cannot confirm or deny. I say, so it was Pamela. He sighs and says, look, I am trying to clean this up. If you want to escalate it, that is your right, but I am offering to resolve it now. I think about it. I say, what about the hearing? He says, the board authorized a third-party survey. The surveyor is scheduled to come out next week. If the fence is compliant, the matter is closed. I say, and if Pamela tries anything else? He says, I will handle it. I say, that is not good enough. I want a written statement from the board acknowledging that the violations were issued in error and that no further action will be taken unless there is a documented, verified violation. He says, I can do that. I will send it to you by the end of the week. I say, fine. He says, thank you, and hangs up. I do not trust him, but I also do not have a lot of options. I wait. On Friday, I receive a letter from the management company. It says the violations have been voided, the gate code has been restored, and the board has instructed staff to ensure all future enforcement actions are based on verified documentation. It is signed by Richard and countersigned by the board president. It is not an apology, but it is something. I file it with the rest of my paperwork. The following Monday, the surveyor shows up. He is a guy in his 40s with a vest covered in pockets and a tripod over his shoulder. He introduces himself as Mark. He says he is here to verify the property boundaries and the fence location. I say, great. He asks if I have a copy of the legal description. I hand him the plat map from my closing documents. He looks at it, nods, and says, this will take about an hour. I say I will be inside if he needs me. He says, no problem. I go inside and try to work on some paperwork, but I keep looking out the window. Mark is moving along the fence line with a measuring device, taking notes, checking angles. About 30 minutes in, I see Pamela's silver sedan pull up in front of my house. She gets out and walks straight into my backyard without knocking. I grab my phone, open the voice recorder app, and hit record. I put the phone in my shirt pocket with the microphone facing out. Then I go outside. Pamela is standing next to Mark, talking at him. She is saying, "You need to check the easement line, not just the property line. The setback is measured from the easement, not the boundary." Mark looks at her and says, "Ma'am, I am measuring from the legal property boundary as described in the recorded plat. If there is an easement, I need documentation." Pamela pulls out her crossbody bag and starts digging through it. She says, "I have the documentation." She pulls out the same folded printout from the hearing. Mark takes it, looks at it, and says, "This is not a legal survey." Pamela says, "It is accurate." Mark says, "No, it is not. The scale is wrong, the source is not certified, and there is no surveyor seal. I cannot use this." Pamela's voice gets louder. She says, "Then what are you using?" Mark says, "The recorded plat and the boundary markers I located with GPS." Pamela says, "That is not sufficient." Mark says, "Ma'am, I am a licensed surveyor. This is my job. If you have concerns about my methodology, you can file a complaint with the state board." Pamela says, "I am filing a complaint right now." She pulls out her phone. Mark shrugs and goes back to his work. Pamela stands there for a minute, staring at him. Then she turns and sees me. She says, "You." I say, "Me." She says, "You put him up to this." I say, "I did not put anyone up to anything. The board hired him." She says, "The board is wrong. You do not build to my standard. You pay to my standard." Third time. I feel the phone recording in my pocket. I keep my voice calm. I say, "Pamela, the surveyor is doing his job. If you have a problem with his findings, take it up with the board." She says, "I am the board." I say, "You are the vice chair. You are not the whole board." She steps closer to me. She is maybe 2 feet away now. She says, "You think you are clever. You think you can lawyer your way out of this. I have been on this board for 6 years. I know every rule, every loophole, every trick. You are not going to win." I say, "I am not trying to win. I am trying to follow the rules." She laughs. She says, "The rules are what I say they are." Mark clears his throat. He says, "Excuse me. I need to finish." Pamela ignores him. She keeps staring at me. She says, "When this survey comes back and it shows you are in violation, I am going to make sure you pay every cent. Fines, legal fees, removal costs, everything. And if you try to fight it, I will drag this out until you give up." I say, "The survey is going to show I am in compliance, because I am." She says, "We will see." Then she turns and walks back toward the street. She gets in her car and drives away. Mark watches her go. He says, "Is she always like that?" I say, "Apparently." Mark finishes his work and packs up his equipment. He says, "I will have the report ready in 3 days. It will go to the management company and the board." I say, "Can I get a copy?" He says, "You are the property owner. You are entitled to a copy. I will email it to you." I thank him. He leaves. I go inside and stop the recording on my phone. I save it with the file name Pamela Threat 3, and I email it to Devin. He listens to it and texts back, "That is gold." She just admitted she is willing to abuse her authority. Keep that safe. If you are enjoying this story, hit the like button and subscribe for more HOA drama. 3 days later, Mark emails me the survey report. It is a 14-page document with diagrams, measurements, and a summary. The summary says the fence is located entirely within the property boundaries. The setback from the property line exceeds the minimum requirement in the Cedar Point Estates design guidelines, and there are no easements or encroachments. The report is signed, sealed, and notarized. I print 3 copies. I email one to Devin. I send one to the management company. I keep one for myself. That night, I get an email from Richard. He says the board has reviewed the survey and the matter is closed. He says no further action will be taken. He thanks me for my cooperation. I feel a wave of relief. It is over. Or so I think. The next morning, I get a letter in the mail. It is from Cedar Point Estates Association. The return address is the management company, but the letter is signed by Pamela. It says, Notice of Violation, Unauthorized Yard Marker. It says I placed a utility marker stake in my yard without HOA approval, and it constitutes an unapproved modification. The fine is $250. I walk outside and look at my yard. There is a small orange stake near the back corner. It is a utility marker the contractor left when we were laying out the fence line. It has been there for weeks. Nobody said anything about it. I pull it out of the ground and bring it inside. I take a picture of it. I take a picture of the empty hole where it was. I write another complaint letter. I say the stake was a temporary construction marker, it has been removed, and the fine is baseless. I send it via certified mail. I am so tired of this. 2 days later, I get a response. It is not from Richard. It is from Pamela. She says the fine stands because the stake was in place for more than 72 hours, which constitutes a permanent installation under the design guidelines. She says if I do not pay within 10 days, it will accrue interest and be placed on my account as a lien. I call Devin. I tell him what is happening. He says she is making stuff up. There is no rule about 72 hours. File an objection and request a hearing. If she denies the hearing, that is a violation of your due process rights under the governing documents. I file the objection. I request a hearing. I cite the section of the governing documents that guarantees homeowners the right to contest fines. A week goes by. No response. I call the management company. Richard says he forwarded my request to the board. I say, when will I hear back? He says, I do not know. I say, this is time sensitive. My closing is in 2 days. If there is a lien on the property, the sale could fall through. He says, I understand, but I do not control the board. I hang up and call Devin. He says if they do not respond before closing, you can demand they provide a lien release letter. If they refuse, you can threaten legal action. The title company will not close with an unresolved lien, so you have leverage. My closing is scheduled for Thursday at 2 in the afternoon. Wednesday night, I still have not heard from the board. I am panicking. I call Richard again. He does not answer. I leave a voicemail. Thursday morning, I get an email from Richard. He says the board met last night and voted to waive the fine pending further review. He attaches a lien release letter. I forward it to my real estate agent and the title company. My agent calls me and says, "What was that about?" I say, "Long story." She says, "Well, it is resolved. We are good to close." I say, "Thank God." I close on the house Thursday afternoon. I sign about 50 pages. I get the keys. It is official. The house is mine. I drive home feeling like I can finally breathe. That night, I get a text from Devin. He says, "Congrats on closing. Now you can really fight back. I say, what do you mean? He says, you have been playing defense. Time to go on offense. I ask him what he has in mind. He says, file a formal complaint with the management company and the board. Request a full audit of Pamela's enforcement actions. Cite the comparison chart, the false tow authorization, the gate lockout, and the bogus fines. Make it clear that if they do not address it, you are going to the state. I think about it. I am exhausted. I do not want to fight anymore. But I also know that if I do not push back, Pamela is going to keep doing this to other people. I decide to do it. I spend the weekend writing a formal complaint. I lay out every incident in chronological order. I attach the survey report, the comparison chart, the recording of Pamela's threats, the false violation notices, and the correspondence with Richard. I cite the Montana statutes that require HOAs to operate transparently and enforce rules uniformly. I request a formal investigation and a written response within 30 days. I send it via certified mail to the board president, the secretary, Richard, and Pamela. I keep a copy for myself. A week goes by. No response. 2 weeks. Nothing. I call Devin. He says, they are hoping you will give up. Do not. File a complaint with the Montana Department of Labor. I look up the process. It is a 4-page form. I fill it out. I attach copies of everything. I mail it to the state office in Helena. The confirmation letter says it will take 60 to 90 days to review. In the meantime, life goes on. I work my shifts. I settle into the house. I avoid Pamela. I see her driving through the neighborhood sometimes, but she does not stop. I hear from neighbors that she is still on the board, still issuing violations, still making people miserable. One neighbor tells me she got fined for having a garden gnome that was too tall. Another neighbor says Pamela tried to fine him for parking his work truck in his driveway overnight. The truck has his company logo on it. Pamela said it was commercial advertising and violated the sign restrictions. He fought it and won, but it took 3 months. About 6 weeks after I filed the state complaint, I get a call from a woman who introduces herself as Linda. She says she is an investigator with the Montana Department of Labor, and she is reviewing my complaint. She asks if I have time to talk. I say yes. She asks me to walk through the timeline. I do. She asks for copies of the recordings. I send them. She says she is also going to interview the management company and the board members. She says it will take a few more weeks. 2 months later, I get a letter from the state. It says the investigation found that Cedar Point Estates Association failed to apply its rules uniformly, issued violations without proper documentation, and retaliated against me for exercising my rights as a homeowner. The letter says the state has ordered the association to refund all fines and fees related to the fence dispute, to issue a written apology, and to implement new procedures for enforcement actions. The letter also says Pamela Brown has been issued a written warning for harassment behavior and has been removed from her role as vice chair of the Design Review Board. I read the letter 3 times. I call Devin. He says, you did it. I say, we did it. He says, no, you did it. You documented everything. You stood your ground. You proved she was abusing her authority. This is huge. I say, what happens now? He says, they have to comply. If they do not, the state can impose fines and take further action. You can also file a civil suit if you want to recover damages. I say, I just want this to be over. He says, "Then it is over. Congratulations." A week later, I get a check in the mail from Cedar Point Estates Association. It is for $875. That is the refund for the fines and fees related to the fence dispute. There is a letter with it. It is signed by the board president. It says the association apologizes for the inconvenience and is committed to fair and transparent enforcement going forward. It does not mention Pamela by name. I deposit the check. I file the letter with the rest of my paperwork. I do not see Pamela much after that. I hear from neighbors that she is still in the subdivision, but she is not on the board anymore. Someone else is running the design review committee now. The new person is reasonable. She approves things quickly. She does not make up rules. Life in Cedar Point Estates gets a little easier. A few months later, I am at the grocery store, and I see Pamela in the checkout line. She sees me. We make eye contact. She does not say anything. She just looks away and pays for her groceries. I do the same. I do not gloat. I do not say anything. I just go home. One night, I am sitting on my back patio, looking at the fence I built. It is still perfect. Every post is level, every panel is straight, every board is tight, the sun is setting, and the light is hitting the wood just right, making it glow. I think about everything that happened. The hearings, the threats, the false violations, the tow truck, the state investigation. It was exhausting. It was stressful. It was unfair. But I won. Not because I was smarter or tougher or luckier. I won because I kept records. I stood my ground, and I did not let a bully intimidate me. A couple of weeks after the state letter, Devin and I meet for lunch. He wants to hear the whole story from start to finish. I tell him everything. He laughs at the part where the tow driver refused to take my truck. He winces at the part where Pamela said the rules are what she says they are. When I finish, he leans back in his chair and says, "You know what the best part of this is?" I say, "What?" He says, "The HOA refunds the fence-related fines and fees. Karen gets a written warning for harassment behavior, and you have a third-party compliance report that clears you completely. That is the trifecta. You got justice, accountability, and vindication." I say, "It does not feel like a trifecta. It feels like I survived." He says, "That is what winning looks like sometimes." We finish lunch and I drive home. On my way back, I pass the Cedar Point Estates sign at the entrance. It looks the same as it always has. Big letters. Fancy script, a promise of community and value. I think about all the people in the subdivision who are still dealing with Pamela's friends on the board, who are still getting bogus fines, who are still afraid to push back. I think about sending them a copy of the state letter. I think about posting it in the neighborhood group chat. But then I realize I do not need to. Word travels fast in a place like this. Everyone knows what happened. Everyone knows Pamela lost. That is enough. A month later, I get a call from Richard. He says the board is forming a new committee to review the design guidelines and enforcement procedures. He asks if I would be willing to serve on the committee. I say, "Why me?" He says, "Because you know the rules better than anyone, and you are not afraid to call out bad behavior." I think about it. I say, "I will think about it." He says, "Take your time. Let me know." I hang up. I have not decided yet. Part of me wants nothing to do with the HOA ever again. Part of me wants to make sure this never happens to anyone else. I will figure it out. In the meantime, I focus on my job, my house, and my life. The fence is still standing. The yard looks great. The neighbors are friendly. Cedar Point Estates is not perfect, but it is better than it was. And that is because one person decided to fight back, document everything, and not give up. I did not set out to be a hero. I just wanted to build a fence. But sometimes, that is how it starts. One Saturday morning, I am out front watering the lawn when a car pulls up. It is a neighbor from 3 houses down. Her name is Jessica. She gets out and walks over. She says, "Can I ask you something?" I say, "Sure." She says, "I heard you had a problem with the HOA." I say, "Yeah." She says, "I am having a problem too. They are saying my mailbox is the wrong color." I say, "What color is it?" She says, "Black." I say, "What color are they saying it should be?" She says, "Bronze." She shows me the violation notice. I read it. It is signed by someone I do not recognize. I say, "Do you have a copy of the design guidelines?" She says, "No." I say, "Get a copy. If black is listed as an approved color, file an objection. If they do not respond, call the state." She says, "The state?" I say, "Yeah." Montana has a process for HOA disputes. I give her the name of the office and Devin's contact information. She thanks me and leaves. I go back to watering the lawn. I feel like I just passed the torch. That afternoon, I get a text from an unknown number. It says, "Is this the guy who took down Pamela Brown?" I text back, "Who is this?" The reply says, "A friend." I just wanted to say thank you. I do not respond. I do not know who it is. But I save the number just in case. Over the next few months, I hear more stories. Another neighbor fought a violation and won. Someone else requested an audit of the HOA finances and found discrepancies. The board president resigned. There is talk of a special election. Cedar Point Estates is changing. It is slow, and it is messy, but it is happening. I like to think I had something to do with it, not because I am special, but because I did not roll over when someone tried to bully me. One night, I am sitting on my back patio again, looking at the fence. The wood is weathered a little. It is darker now, more settled. It blends into the yard. It looks like it has always been there. I think about the day Mark the surveyor came out, the day Pamela stood in my backyard and said the rules are what I say they are. The day I played the recording for Devin and he said, "That is gold." I think about the moment I got the letter from the state and realized it was over. I think about the check for $875 and the apology letter that did not really apologize. I think about the fact that Pamela is still living in Cedar Point Estates, still driving past my house, still probably angry that she lost. I do not feel sorry for her. I feel sorry for the people she hurt before me, the ones who did not have the time or the resources or the stubbornness to fight back. I feel sorry for the people she might hurt in the future, if she ever gets back into a position of power. But I also know that the system worked. Not perfectly, not quickly, but it worked. The state stepped in. The board was held accountable. The rules are being applied more fairly now. That is progress. I finish my drink and go inside. I have a shift in the morning. Life goes on. The fence is still standing. The HOA is still there. But I am not afraid of them anymore. I know my rights. I know how to document. I know how to push back. And if they come for me again, I will be ready. A few weeks later, I run into Richard at the gas station. He sees me and waves. He walks over and says, "Hey, I wanted to let you know. The board approved the new enforcement procedures. Every violation has to be documented with photos and a citation to the specific rule. Homeowners get 15 days to respond before any fine is issued, and all fines go through a review committee before they are finalized." I say, "That is great." He says, "It is because of you." I say, "It is because the old system was broken." He says, "Well, either way, thank you." I nod. He goes back to his car. I finish pumping gas and drive home. That night, I get an email from the neighborhood group chat. Someone posted a message saying, "Does anyone know how to fight an HOA violation?" I reply with a short message. I say, "Document everything. Get copies of the rules. File a written objection within 14 days. If they do not respond, contact the Montana Department of Labor." I include the website. 3 people reply with "thank you." One person asks if I can meet for coffee to talk about it. I say yes, we schedule it for next week. I realize I am becoming the guy people call when they have HOA problems. I do not mind. It feels good to help. It feels good to know that the hell I went through might make things easier for someone else. I think about Devin saying, "You got justice, accountability, and vindication." He was right. But the best part is not what I got. The best part is what I stopped. Pamela is not on the board anymore. She cannot issue bogus fines. She cannot threaten people with towing. She cannot schedule hearings at impossible times. She is just another homeowner now, and she has to follow the same rules as everyone else. I meet with the neighbor who asked for help. Her name is Carla. She has a violation for a front yard flower bed that the HOA says is too wide. She shows me the notice. I read it. It cites a rule about landscaping, but the rule is vague. I tell her to measure the flower bed, take pictures, and request a copy of any other properties that have been cited for the same violation. I tell her to file a written objection and request a hearing. She takes notes. She thanks me. She says, "I did not know you could do this." I say, "Most people do not. That is how they get away with it." She leaves. I stay and finish my coffee. A month later, Carla texts me. She says, "I won. They dropped the violation." I text back, "Congrats." She says, "I could not have done it without your help." I say, "Yes, you could. You just needed to know the process." She sends a thumbs up emoji. I smile. One more person who did not get screwed by the HOA. That weekend, I am working in the yard. I am trimming the hedges along the fence line. A car slows down in front of my house. I look up. It is Pamela. She is staring at me through the windshield. I stare back. She does not stop. She drives away. I go back to trimming. I do not think about her anymore. She is not my problem. She is not anyone's problem. She is just a person who had power, abused it, and lost it. That is the way it should be. A few months after that, I get a letter from the management company. It says Cedar Point Estates Association is conducting a membership survey to gather feedback on the new enforcement procedures. There is a questionnaire attached. I fill it out. I give high marks for transparency and due process. I give low marks for communication and responsiveness. In the comments section I write, "The association is better than it was, but there is still work to do." Homeowners should not have to hire lawyers or file state complaints to get fair treatment. The board should be proactive, not reactive. I mail it back. I do not know if anyone will read it. But at least I said it. Life in Cedar Point Estates settles into a routine. I work my shifts. I maintain the house. I help neighbors when they ask. I avoid drama. The fence is still perfect. The yard looks great. The HOA mostly leaves me alone. Every once in a while I see Pamela driving through the neighborhood. We do not wave. We do not speak. We just exist in the same space, like two people who used to be enemies and now are just strangers. I think about writing a letter to the board suggesting they adopt a code of conduct for board members, something that would prevent future Pamelas from abusing their authority. But then I realize someone else will probably do it. The neighborhood is waking up. People are paying attention now. They are asking questions. They are demanding accountability. That is the real win. Not what happened to me, but what is happening because of me. One night I am sitting on my back patio with a beer, looking at the stars. The fence is behind me, solid and straight. The yard is quiet. The neighborhood is calm. I think about the day Pamela showed up and said, "You do not build to my standard. You pay to my standard." I think about the day the surveyor told her she was wrong. I think about the day the state sent the letter saying she had been removed from the board. I think about the check for $875. I think about the recording where she said, "We can tow first and explain later. That is how enforcement works." And then I think about the final report, the one that said a third-party compliance report clears the narrator completely, and the HOA refunds the fence-related fines and fees, and Karen gets a written warning for harassment behavior. It all feels like a long time ago, even though it has only been a few months. I finish my beer and go inside. Tomorrow, I have another shift. The day after that, I will mow the lawn. The day after that, maybe I will help another neighbor fight a bogus violation. Life goes on. The fence is still standing. And I am still here, in my house, in my yard, in my neighborhood. Not because I am lucky, not because I am special, but because I refuse to let a bully win. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.